time to respond in a considered way, as opposed to just consistently in fight or flight in the front row. In fact, if we're stressed, our face is up against the screen of that movie. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think if we can understand that, and there's a little bit of will involved and there's a bit of discipline, but once we get further enough back, we're like, okay, well, I can see why this is happening. It is because of meditation practice. It is because I do things, on a mindful basis. It is because I'm exercising more. We're actually bringing our physiology along on the journey. You and I can intellectually agree right now that we want to be happy, full of love, empathy, compassion, and do all sorts of things to make people feel good and all that sort of stuff. But if our nervous system is not feeling great, very hard to convert that into action.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's not going to get applied and get behaved and practiced because we can't.
It's not. So, we need to help these bodies along in a period of ever-increasing activity, movement, speed. I mean, everything's moving faster, so these nervous systems need to adapt to that, and it's not going to happen. All of that adaptation exists inside our own pure conscious experience, because our body's going to regulate, our nervous system's going to be healthier and happier, and it comes down to all of us to put that into place, because we're really, for a short-lived time, you might be able to listen to a guided meditation, or you can go away and have a nice weekend, and there's all sorts of stuff. But we ultimately have to take responsibility for that at an individual level.
Nicho, how important in this journey, and I also teach meditation, but how important in this journey is it to meet people where they're at, and the ability to apply a relative story to them that they can understand and take and use, that's not so far off cuff that they can't get their head around what you're trying to say. So it's the simplicity of the story that allows them to use the information properly.
Well, if you can't do that, then you're not going to relate to someone.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have to, it's like, I often think that some practices may have the idea of, let's just sort of think, you might picture someone standing on a roof, and that they might say to the person on the ground, hey, the view's great up here, come up. And they're like, well, how do I get there? As opposed to saying, okay, I've really loved the view from up here, I'm going to go back down.
Yeah, exactly.
To the ground, and I'm going to have a conversation with someone, I'm going to help them back up so they can come and see the view. And so, you have to be able to have a conversation with someone on a basis in which they're going to relate to. Otherwise, you're absolutely right. It's just not relatable, and they're not going to see in you what it may be that could help them, because they just don't relate to you.
Yeah, okay.
And I think and to your point as a teacher yourself, yes, you have those conversations, you find a common thread, and then you go from there.
Yeah, well, I find myself, Nicho, a little bit is spending a lot of time on the narrative, like what you've mentioned in the movie cinemas, and being either in the movie or so close that you can't step back and look at it from another lens. But even things like that, to just the simplicity of the narrative takes a lot of work. So people, when you say that to someone, their heads nod and they're like, I get it now. Like, I get it because it's been explained to me. And that's where I think there's a lot of need from people who want to raise the consciousness and the expansion to really work on the story and the simplicity of the story, not to tell a story to tell back to themselves of how much they actually know, but to tell to the other person so they can use it.
Yes. Find the things that people are challenged by. I mean, I'm sure, like yourself, a vast proportion of the people who learn to meditate with me, obviously anxiety is a huge one.
Yeah.
Sleep's a big one. You could probably bracket, certainly on Insight Timer, one of our huge categories is sleep. Our second huge category is anxiety.
Yeah.
And those, people are looking, they want to trust that a meditation practice or whatever it might be is going to really help them, and really quickly, because they've turned up to a course, whatever it might be, and they're a little bit out of their comfort zone to think, well, how is it that a practice like this could, have such an impact? And they want to feel comfortable about that, and then they need to trust the process. So yes, we have to, I think one has to really find those places to relate to someone.
Yeah, that's cool. I think you made the really good point. They want to we have to make them feel comfortable. All right, back to the story of yours. Like, can you step through a little bit more detail in terms of the transition from, from normal business to the step to buy Insight Timer, 100,000? What do those weeks look like when you do purchase it, and the vision that you and Chris initially have for this app and the potential?
Yes. So when I started teaching, I was quite busy quite quickly. And so, and Christopher and I he'd built a successful online product company here in Australia, and we were talking. He'd also learned to meditate. So we were just, getting into that, and I was teaching, and the conversation was just around what I felt to be a challenge as a sole practitioner in terms of just keeping in touch with clients and students and those types of things. And I'm reasonably well resourced. I know how to put a website together, and I can use all that. But I thought, if I'm a sole practitioner who wants to free up my time, I think there's a bit of a gap. So it came from a problem that I had around managing that. And then it sort of evolved. We got the idea. We both got background in, running software teams and those sorts of things. So always we thought, if we're going to look at this, we want to buy something, not build from the start. We thought just too hard. Yep. And so we looked at a lot of apps, and there is a lot of meditation apps now.
There's heaps.
At least 1,000 of them.
Yeah.
So crowded. So we looked around. Calm was getting going. Headspace was on its way. And then I remember Christopher rang me one day, and we'd probably looked at Insight Timer, but people who on this audience may remember that Insight Timer was the first meditation app in the App Store back in 2000 and trying to think now, but I think they launched it in 2008. So we were not far behind, 2009, and it was called Zen Timer back then.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. Not to lose track of this conversation, but what happened was we realised that despite how simple the app looked, it had this really great community behind it, and it had a few teachers on it, and we think this is the one. And so we contacted the owner, a guy called Brad Fulmer.
Yep.
And we went to San Francisco and we bought it from him. And we always felt that at the time, actually, it was a paid premium app. I think you had to pay $2.99 to download it. So we made it free, and we felt that we wanted to have really, it was conscious first, commercial second. And we just used, I think, our experience and some of the things we've done, both in terms of, pulling teams together and financing and that sort of thing. And one thing led to another. And so the first steps were just sort of clean it up and start to refine, the UI. And then we, got lots more teachers on board. I think might have been 10 teachers back then. I think there's well over 3,000 now.
Yeah.
And so what we really saw was the beginnings of, teacher supply, user demand, and to sort of keep investing in either side of that experience. And then the growth somewhat took off, it's taken care of itself. I mean, we don't advertise, we don't spend any money. So we have essentially all of those 6 million registered users are by word of mouth. So that's all organic.
Mate, how do you, that's like, sorry, the story there is really amazing in like going to buy the app. And the thing I love about the app and, is it's the community, like the community and the foundation of it has been about the customer and about raising the consciousness of mindfulness and meditation over the profit, which is, astronomical compared to some of the other meditation apps, which do, they're not cheap. But how do you make that decision? And obviously from a business and career sense that know that it can be financially viable eventually, how does that play out in the planning?
Well, it takes some trust, and we were fortunate to be approached by some like-minded individuals from the States.
Yep.
So we have a couple of shareholders. We have a group of shareholders who sort of just have been very supportive of that vision, which has been good. And Chris and I think have always been very clear with people who wish to be involved that this is consciousness first and commercial second. And so people, they buy into that. And then we always felt that at a certain point in time, we have to face up to commercial reality of that. We have a team of almost 40 people. We have some outsourced services offshore. We have a call center. There's plenty of overhead now. And with obviously the size of the audience, our hosting bills with Amazon, I mean, it's a proper operation. But what we then always felt was important, that an extremely good free product for all, but then teachers also needed to see ways that they could make a viable income. Hence why you can now see there's a premium subscription product. There's also courses, and a very decent proportion of all our revenue goes to teachers, more so than other platforms, as far as I'm aware. We really felt that the teachers needed to make the majority of that. And so I think that's always been important to us, was that if there is a teacher out there who maybe thinks that they could spend more time teaching meditation or selling courses, that they actually feel that investment of time is worthwhile, and then maybe they can follow their dream to be a full-time meditation teacher, and that the insight time, the platform's a way, to help facilitate that. So we have been very gentle around what it means to introduce revenue, because it's just a fact of building an operation like this. Over the last 12 months, we've introduced some subscription, some courses, and we continue to refine that. And so far, it's it's gone very well. And then over the sort of next 12 months, it'll be about sort of just continuing to grow that and continue to refine it. And yes, it's been, to have done it organically, I think is really testament to the power of the community.
Yeah, okay.
It's a very engaged and loyal community. There's 6,000 groups of meditators on there, which is pretty amazing. And that's what people love about it. And the community is something that you won't find elsewhere. And I think over the next 12 months, we'll actually provide more tools to get a lot more happening in those groups, and create better ways for people to communicate around messaging. It's all pretty clunky still in there.
It is clunky, Nicho, but it's legit. Like, it's legitimate conversation, and it's legitimate care in those groups, that you see people with a problem or a challenge, and someone will come in with with a tool or a resource or a comment that's not. It's really nice, and there's some really there's some high level people with some real consciousness and some great ideas that get on that feed and contribute, which is also what I love, that they're not just sort of not contributing and it's just like backwards and forwards sort of crappy communication. It's quite deep and meaningful communication.
It is. I think with all communities, you get all types. But yes, I think that stuff, that basis, I think it's part of our DNA. And Christopher, who's the CEO and, drives that product side of things with such a capable team, we recognize that, and we also don't want to change that unique thing about Insight Timer, which is, where it feels down to earth. It feels community based. It feels that we are somewhere that people can come, for a simple meditation experience, and that won't change. And you can see that in terms of just how we've moved the look and feel along a bit. But we don't want to become, too. We don't want to take that too far. Are
you mindful of that when you have your meetings and you build your strategy around how you keep the foundations and the cores and have real clarity on what those are, but then continue to elevate the experience and the product?
Absolutely. It's a fine line, because there are a couple of the other players who have a very above the line strategy around securing customers. They've raised tens and tens of millions of dollars, advertise in a whole bunch of different places, and we don't do that. And so, of course, it does require sticking to a strategy that, while simple and maybe less colourful or less sort of in your face, it takes trusting that. And I think it'll hold us in good stead. But yes, we do. We remind ourselves that as much as sometimes the temptation might be to do things differently, we've essentially added 6 million registered users, and it's just been through word of mouth.
Yeah.
And so if we can further build those relationships. There's no question why that doesn't